Hi, I'm Kylan with Superfly Paragliding, and today we're going to be talking about installing reserves into free flight harnesses and paramotor harnesses. If you didn't catch our last video where we talked about the different types of reserves and how to pick which one is right for your flying style, go check that out. For this video, we chose 3 different reserves. The first one being the Jin Yeti Cross 2, which is probably one of our best sellers. It's a planar square reserve that comes in at a really good price point, relatively lightweight for what it is. Next up is going to be the Advance Companion SQR 140. We chose this one due to its larger size to put in the paramotor. And then finally we have the High Adventure Beamer, which is a steerable Regalo style reserve. And we chose this one because it does have a different installation type than most other reserves. All right, so to start off, we're gonna be installing this Yeti Cross 2 into the brand new Easiness 4 from Advance. For this one, we're gonna need the deployment bag. This one is specific to the harness. So we're gonna be swapping out the original for the new. Now, as we go through this process, one thing to note, most paragliding harnesses and reserves install roughly the same way. So you can kind of pick and choose parts of this video for your purpose. So we're gonna start out by disassembling the original reserve. And this is just gonna include opening up the deployment bag, pulling out the lines. You wanna be super careful with this. You do not want them to get all tangled up. So make sure to set them aside neatly. You notice here, I just have them laid out across the deployment bag. So one thing to note with this reserve, a lot of reserves have a single stage opening, which means there's one closing loop. And once that's opened up, the reserve comes out of the deployment bag. This one in particular has a 2-stage opening. So you'll notice that as of right now, the lines are sticking out of the deployment bag, but the reserve is still stuck. And it's not until the secondary loop is released that the reserve can actually come out of the deployment bag. This allows the reserve to be coming out faster, generally leading to a quicker and more efficient deployment. Now, as we're doing this, we want to make sure that we keep everything in line. As of right now, I have everything opened up. Lines are not tangled. I'm really paying attention to exactly what's happening here. And we're just gonna kind of set it up in a way that we can move the reserve directly onto it so we can repeat the process in reverse. Now, we were talking about how the other deployment bag was a 2-stage release. This one in particular is actually a single-stage release. So we are going to have to change the way that the lines are routed just slightly. So in order to do that, what we're gonna end up doing is we're just gonna create a loop about the same size as the original, put it right on top of where the original loop is, and take that rubber band and encase all those lines. So now you can see there's just a few more lines added here, keeps everything nice and clean, and if needed, we can do it one more time. This is actually good enough. We can just leave it as it is. The first thing in is the last thing to go out, so you wanna make sure that you don't have anything that's gonna be overlapping, causing potential bag lock or any tangles that you don't want. Now I'm gonna go through with each one of these groups and just make sure I have them in a nice position before I start with the next one, just to keep everything clean as possible. One thing to note, some deployment bags have numbers or have labels that kind of tell you how to close it up, others don't. So if yours does, fantastic, it makes things a little bit easier for you. Otherwise, generally what you're gonna do is you're gonna start with the bungee or the rubber band, and you're gonna go across. So we're gonna start here to this grommet, then we're gonna go towards the top. In this case, it's labeled number 2. And then finally, this one, labeled number 3, is gonna come and close everything together. So you notice at this point, everything is held together very tightly. This is the form factor is going to be in the reserve itself. Now, for closing the loop itself, we're gonna just put it through the bungee, and we wanna see about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of a loop in here. If you have a very massive loop, in this case, there's always chance for, on a quick deployment, this could potentially get locked up or create some sort of bag lock and create a failed deployment. So make sure you have about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, or just enough to stick your thumb through the clearance. For this bag in particular, it finishes off with a flap that has 2 different securing loops. This is just to keep things clean and keep rocks outside of the reserve. So we're gonna go to one side, pull the elastic through, and again, we wanna see just enough to stick your thumb in, or just about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, and we'll replicate that on the opposite side as well. So for the installation of this reserve into this harness, you'll notice that there's a very large loop right here, and this is actually allows for you to not have to use any additional hardware, since this can actually fit around the reserve itself. And I'll show you how that works in just a minute. Now the other way, in case that, say you have a reserve that the loop is only around this big, like 2 inches long, you can't fit the reserve through this. And so what you're gonna need is you're gonna need a carabiner. This in particular is an 8mm carabiner, and then 2 O-rings. So to start out, we're just gonna use this loop and not work with any of the hardware. So first we're gonna find the Y bridle. In this case, it's just hiding right here next to the reserve container. We wanna pull that all the way out, make sure we're looking at the connections to the harness itself. The reason we do this is, it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes we catch a Y bridle not actually hooked up completely, or maybe it's routed incorrectly. So you want to make sure that you have your hands on it and your eyes on it to make sure that everything looks perfect. In this case, I can double check. Advance is really nice. They sew their Y bridles directly on, so there's no way of messing that one up, but we're still going to check it. You notice there's the red loop, and this is what is secured to the harness itself, and the Y bridle is attached here on the right side. Checking for the same thing on the left side. Looks fantastic. So to connect the reserve to the harness, with this method, it's going to go through the loop on the harness. We're going to pull all the way down to the end of the loop, and we're going to start on the far end of the reserve and push its way all the way through. And as you'll notice, this is impossible to take off without actually bringing it through the reserve again. So this is a very, very secure way, very strong way, without having to use any extra hardware. All right, so by the time that you're finished with this, you want to make sure that the knot itself is looped around the opposite end. If it looks like this, where it's looped across itself, that actually is significantly less strong. So we want to make sure that it's looped across the opposite end and it looks like a handshake. Now, this is where you'd end up using a malleon if you didn't have the ability to put the reserve through the loop. That would just connect the one side to the other. And you'd use the O-rings to just secure them to the side so there's no possible of any side loading. So to finish this one up, we're gonna take some tape. It's called Stretch and Seal. It's a non-adhesive tape, so it doesn't leave any residues when it's on there for quite a while. We're gonna take roughly a 6-inch section, and we're gonna go ahead and pull this nice and tight around that whole entire knot. And what this does is it makes sure that over time, when you're sitting on the harness, if you're traveling, whatever the case might be, that these loops don't come loose. If they do come loose and you throw, we have seen a couple times where the amount of friction that builds up on the deployment is actually enough to damage the bridle itself. So we don't want this to be a single-use item for you. We want you to be able to use it as many times as possible. So this is a very important step. Now, once this is complete, we've confirmed that this is connected to the shoulders. We have the Y bridle with a clean routing all the way down. We know it's connected to the reserve, and the reserve itself in the deployment bag is good and ready to go. We can prep the harness for installation. We're gonna start off by making sure that the Y bridle is placed cleanly inside of the sleeve that's designed for the routing, all the way down to the reserve compartment under your seat. Now, a very important thing here. First thing in is the last thing to come out, and you always want to make sure that the reserve comes out first, followed by the bridle. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure you have the orientation of the reserve correct. In this case, you'll notice there's a silver dot on the deployment bag itself, and right in here there's also a silver dot on the harness. You want to make sure that when you have the reserve installed that the two dots are touching so that you know that you have the reserve in the correct orientation. Now, we're going to start off by raising the reserve up nice and high so we can expose the Y bridle itself, in which case we want to make sure that if it's going to be coming out this way, we want it to go in the exact opposite. So Y bridle goes in first, and we're going to tuck that all the way down to the bottom of the reserve compartment. We're going to kind of zigzag the Y bridle all the way down until the reserve is in the compartment. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work to get it in there, but as you can see, once it's in, it just slides nicely. We'll go ahead and start off by pulling this zipper closed. Now, it does act as a broken zipper in this case. It throws a lot of people off. They think that the harness is broken, but as soon as we end up closing this back up, it'll look correct. Now, we're gonna close this as much as we possibly can. With this harness, you'll notice that there's a piece of fabric sewn to the end of the zipper, so you can't go past the end of the zipper. So we wanna go as far as we possibly can, and then I usually pull it back about 1 inch just to give me some room, make it easy for me to access when I need it. Now I'm gonna grab a string. This is going to allow me to go and pull the closing loop, this little white loop right here, through the closing grommet. Now, a super important thing. On this harness in particular, but also with a lot of other harnesses, you want to make sure that the bridle for the handle itself goes in between the two closing loops. You notice I have the one closing loop going through the grommet here, and the second one is on the opposite side, right over here. So it's in between, we know we're good. The reason we want to make sure that it's not, say, looped around this way is it shortens the bridle essentially, and it makes it so it might not actually be able to come out. So now that we've confirmed that the bridle is in between the two closing loops, I'm gonna grab the first one, give it a nice tug. I wanna make sure we expose the loop through the grommet. You can kind of see it there. There's only about 1/4 of an inch going through, just enough to get this yellow line right through the loop. Sometimes it takes a little bit of force, but just be patient with it. It'll work out really well. On this harness, there's actually a small sleeve that the end of that loop goes into. This just prevents the lines of your glider getting stuck around this, causing unnecessary snags. Now, once that's in, we can grab our line and make sure you pull it out very slowly. If you pull it out quick, it gives it unnecessary friction and can actually burn through the closing loops, and those are not easy to fix. So the next step is we're gonna grab the zipper head that's up by the shoulders. One thing to note is not all harnesses have zippers. Some of them are Velcro, so you wanna make sure that you're kind of working with them in the same way and closing them up at the same time. So I'm gonna just follow the opening all the way up here and grab that zipper head, bring it down to the very end of the zipper. Now, once you have the zipper all the way down, you're gonna go ahead and close it up just like you would a jacket or a coat. Go ahead and just bring that on, and you're gonna bring it up, I'm gonna say about 1 to 2 inches, kind of for the same reason. We wanna be able to work with it and not have to backtrack. So again, I'm gonna grab that string that I used to close up the outer loop. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this closing loop through. Again, I got about 1/4 inch or just enough to get that yellow line right through it. This one also has a sleeve just like the other side, so we're gonna go ahead and work into getting that in the right spot. Once that's in place, you can go ahead and remove this line. Again, move very slowly so you don't risk burning anything. Now, once that's out, we can finish securing the handle itself. In this case, there's a magnet right up top, which meets with the magnet that's on the harness itself. And down at the bottom, there's a neoprene sleeve that's a little bit stretchy that's gonna cover the bottom of the handle. So I'm gonna grab that sleeve, and we're just gonna kind of work its way around the bottom of the handle. All right, so now that we have the handle in place and everything is secured the way it needs to be, we can take the zipper that's in the front, work that all the way down to the end. You notice that closes up, and this has a little sleeve for the zipper to go in so it doesn't get snagged on any lines. We're gonna go ahead and do that same thing on the upper zipper. Now, sometimes the bridle itself kind of works its way out. It's still in a good position. You just need to push it back into the sleeve and work that zipper all the way back up to the shoulders. All right, so once these zippers are all closed up and we confirm that everything is in the place that it shows on the manual, the installation is complete. Now, one thing that we like to do here is we want to make sure that this is going to work the first time. So what we're going to do is the installation looks fantastic, and we're going to test it. Go ahead and grab that handle and just gently pull out. I'm going to make sure that reserve comes out exactly how it's supposed to. If it came out, replicate exactly what you did, and you should be set. So moving on, we're gonna go ahead and take this reserve off, and we're going to install a beamer into the same harness. So for the installation of the beamer, we went ahead and skipped the process of installing it into the deployment bag since it is the exact same as the other one. Now, where things get a little bit different here is we are not going to be using this Y bridle at all. So we're gonna go ahead and stow this away. If your harness has the ability to take the Y bridle off, go ahead and do that now. Otherwise, this one is sewn in, so we have to find a place to stick it. This harness in particular has a Velcro opening that allows us to bunch up the Y bridle and stow it safely. Now, the reason that we're not using the Y bridle is steerable reserves actually have 2 different attachment points. This one in particular, you'll notice has the handle on the right side, which is labeled by the green. It also has a R right here. This one is labeled with red and an L right here. So to start off with the beamer, we're gonna go ahead and push the beamer aside and extend the bridles that are attached to the beamer. So we wanna make sure it's not twisted around just to make sure that there's no unnecessary friction when in use. And at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and lay the 2 bridles next to each other. In this case, I've got the right on the harness's right side and the left on the harness's left side with the handles pointing to the outside. Now, to attach this to the harness, we're gonna grab 2 malleons. In this case, these are 6mm malleons. They're about 30 to 40 millimeters long. Go ahead and open these guys up, and we're going to use some O-rings as well to secure them to make sure there's no potential for side loading. So I'm going to start off by putting the O-ring around the attachment point. And I'm going to swing the malleon right through and finish up that O-ring with 1 loop. We're going to go ahead and push the malleon through until the gate is on the bottom side. All right, so now that we have the malleons installed and we can confirm the gates when they close are gonna be moving upwards, we'll go ahead and open those up all the way, grab an O-ring, stick it on, and we're gonna go ahead and take the first side. In this case is the left on the beamer. I'm gonna go through the open gate side, twist once. Now I'm attached to the malleon itself. So I'm gonna finish this off by taking the O-ring, doing 1 final loop, putting it through the gate. You're gonna wanna put some blue Loctite on here. Don't use red because you wanna be able to open it up again. But once you have the Loctite on, go ahead and close this up all the way. Loctite, wrench tight. We're gonna go ahead and repeat the same process for the other side. So now that we have the bridles from the beamer attached to the harness, we just want to double check that everything is aligned correctly, there's no unnecessary twists, and we want to make sure that nothing is tangled. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the bridles. Again, we're making sure that the brakes are on the outside on both sides. I'm going to follow those down, ensuring there's no extra twists. It's not tangled around each other. So now that we've confirmed that everything is installed correctly and everything is nice and neat, no twists, no tangles, we're going to go ahead and grab the harness and tip it up on its side. And we're going to work the bridle itself into the sleeve. Now these handles can get a little bit cumbersome sometimes. You're just going to slowly work with them. Don't push too hard, just kind of coax their way in and make sure that you have those in nice and clean. So now that we have the Reserves bridles stowed, we're going to grab the Reserve itself, and again we're going to check to make sure the dot on the Reserve aligns with the dot on the harness. Now with steerables in particular, you really want to make sure that there's no unnecessary twist in it. As you throw, it's going to end up twisting, but you want to minimize that as much as possible. So make sure you're not twisting the Reserve as you're installing it. First thing in is the last thing out. Bridles go first, Reserve comes second, and at this point, closing up everything is going to be the exact same process as it was in the last Reserve. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the paramotor. To start off, it's a lot easier to remove the Reserve compartment from the harness. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Now the way that this Reserve is going to be mounted to the compartment, you'll notice that it's going to sit straight in, and where the handle should sit is right next to this top securing loop. So we're going to go ahead and grab the handle and go around that loop, give it a nice tug, and this is attached. So for this installation, you're going to need a Y bridle. This one in particular is one that Jin makes. It's 125 centimeters long. Now, just like the free flight harness, there's two ways you can attach this. You can either use a malleon, as we showed before, or in this case, we're going to go ahead and loop the bridle onto the Reserve itself. All right, so this is the point where we could either use that tape that we used earlier, or in this case, Advance gives you these nice little sleeves that you can slide over the nut just to make sure they don't come loose. So now we're gonna move over to the Reserve compartment itself. We're gonna go ahead and prep this and get it ready to put on the paramotor. Now, most of these bags have the option of being placed on the left and the right side of the paramotor, so you wanna pay attention to which side you're gonna be putting it on to make sure that you have the routing of the bridle correct. In this case, it's gonna be on the right-hand side of the paramotor, which is going to be sitting like this. So we want the Reserve to have its bridles coming out through this side. So I'm going to take the Reserve bridle itself and place it down into the compartment. And you'll notice on this one, there's actually a small Velcro closing loop that you can stick in here. That just kind of keeps everything clean, keeps it in the right location, makes it a little bit easier to work with. In which case, we are now going to take the bridle that's attached to the Reserve itself and just zigzag it back and forth a couple times until the Reserve is sitting cleanly on top. Again, the first thing in is the last thing out, so we want to make sure that if we pull up on this Reserve, everything is going to come out in the orientation that we want. So now that we have the bridles routed and the Reserve on top of the container, we're going to go ahead and grab that string that we used earlier and close up these loops. In this case, this is also labeled as 1, 2, and 3, so we're going to follow those to make sure we close it correctly. Now on a Reserve that's this size, it can be a little bit tricky. Oftentimes in this case, you can see that there's about 6 to 7 inches of a gap. So it's gonna take a little bit of force to get it closed, but it will close. All right, now we have all 3 attached. We're gonna go ahead and give that a nice big tug. Don't be afraid to hound down on it quite a bit. And now in this case, I've got a red closing loop that's exposed about 1/4 inch, very similar to the last, very similar to the free flight harness that we did. Go ahead and stick the yellow line through and into its compartment. Now at this point, we can go and carefully and slowly pull this through to make sure we don't burn the closing line. This is where things can get a little tricky. There's a lot of tension on this, and so if you accidentally pull the handle, it can completely undo everything that you just did. We're gonna go ahead and turn this around and match exactly what we did on the opposite side. Now, just like the free flight harness, it is very, very important that the bridle going to the handle itself goes in between the 2 closing loops. So make sure that you're paying attention to where those are so that you end up closing it correctly. All right, so now that we have this all closed up, we're gonna finish off by securing the handle itself, in which case this has a sleeve on both sides. So I'm gonna go ahead and push the ends into those. And then finally, this one actually has a flap that comes up with Velcro on the end. That's gonna go through the handle itself and match up with the Velcro on the opposite side. This gives you the cleanest possible securing, knowing that nothing can get snagged. Now, at this point, just like on the other harness, it would be a fantastic idea to do a test throw and then redo everything to make sure that everything works correctly. This is where things get a little bit easier. This is why we took the reserve container off in the first place. You'll notice that there's a Velcro strip as well as a zipper that goes all the way across and matches up with here. So we're gonna go ahead and get that closed up. So now that you have the container installed onto the paramotor itself, we're gonna go ahead and prepare for the routing of the bridle. So we're gonna bring that straight up, and you're gonna notice that I'm gonna be on the outside of the swing arms. We do not wanna be on the inside of the swing arms because if you do throw and they're mounted incorrectly, it'll actually dangle from the swing arm itself and can cause damage to the paramotor and can also make you fall down sideways. So we don't wanna see that. Bring that straight up. This harness in particular has a sleeve hiding right here. So we'll go ahead and open that up, and we're gonna route our Y bridle inside of that. All right, so once we have the bridle routed, we're gonna work our way over to the top of the shoulder straps, and we're gonna open up the Velcro securing areas for the bridle. So you'll notice once we open this up, in this case there's a small blue attachment point that can be red, that can be orange, it just depends on the harness itself. That's where we're gonna go ahead and attach our malleons. Go ahead and take those guys. We're gonna have the gate side towards the shoulder straps themselves, and we're gonna grab our O-rings. And I like to just place them on here just to kind of get them out of our way, but make sure we don't lose them. And I'll grab the first side of the Y bridle. We're gonna go ahead and lift this up, go through and loop the O-ring around the bridle. And we're gonna do the exact same thing to the opposite side. At this point, we're gonna grab our Loctite. We're gonna put a little drop on the threads just to make sure that we have these closed up correctly. And then again, Loctite, wrench tight, both sides. All we have to focus on now is just routing the bridle itself. So I've got a little bit of extra slack here. So I'm gonna go ahead and just work the bridle back onto itself, and we're gonna close up that compartment. All right, so now that we've finished up the installation of the free flight harness and the paramotor harness, we wanna make a note that we do not recommend that you do this by yourself. We want you to bring it into us or bring it to your dealer so that you can make sure that you have an extra set of eyes on it and make sure that everything is done as safely and as efficiently as possible. If you have any further questions, feel free to give us a call at 801-255-9595 or shoot us an email at service@superflyinc.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.